Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 181 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Bill Mcgoldrick, head of original programming at the Syfy channel. He was brought in 2 years ago to oversee a major overhaul of the network's lineup, which is designed to lure hardcore science fiction fans back to the channel with smart, ambitious shows. The new lineup includes adaptations of many classic fantasy and science fiction novels, including works by Arthur C. Clarke, Aldous Huxley, and Frederik Pohl, as well as books by newer writers who've been guests on this show such as Dan Simmons, John Scalzi, James S.A. Corey, and Lev Grossman. And now, here's our interview with Bill Mcgoldrick. All right, so we're here with Bill Mcgoldrick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, just tell us a bit about how you first got interested in science fiction.
Well, I was that kid that liked to read a lot of everything. But then, in those teenage years, probably like most of your listeners, I was very attracted to sci-fi because I found it more interesting and more challenging than the books that were sort of being jammed down your throat in school. So it was probably through books, probably through comic books, probably, through TV shows and things like that where I, just developed the appetite for it.
I mean, so what were some of those books that you were reading that you thought were challenging and interesting?
Well, a lot of them, the great part about my job is some of them are airing very soon. And Childhood's End and Arthur C. Clarke was, early influence on me. Asimov, like everybody else, I was looking for short stories back then. I was a big DC Comics guy, big Batman fan. So anything that was either the original or derivatives of Batman, I was very into when I was really young. So the gamut, and then sort of as I got a little bit older, I would watch The Twilight Zone with my dad. That was, we would watch it in repeats and stuff like that. And then I would get interested in those kinds of stories too. So, no, there was no kind of one moment where the bell rang or no one book where it said, okay, now I'm a sci-fi fan, but I'm in my early 40s, so I was just as influenced by Star Wars as everybody else, and then I, as you'd read the background about movies like that, I'd want to read more about the sources that, Lucas was influenced by and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you told me that you were an aspiring writer at one point?
Yeah, when I came to USC, I wanted to try writing, and I learned early on that I'd be much better off reading scripts rather than writing them. So that was early in my college career, and I took all those courses in college where you write little short films, and then you have the class read it back to you. And I remember those days kind of in horror right now. But it did help me develop an empathy for writers and a real respect for anyone who tries that and anyone who really makes a career of it.
You studied film or TV or something like that?
I actually minored in film. I could never get in the USC film school, no matter how many times I tried. So I ended up minoring in film and majoring in business when I was at USC.
And so then what did you do after graduation? Like, how did you become a TV executive?
So I was, kind of bartending all through college and kicking around and trying to break into the industry and passing out my resume wherever I could. And it found its way to a guy named Stephen Chow, who was at that time a producer. He had sort of made his career as a reality executive. He was the guy that greenlit Cops and America's Most Wanted and kind of rose through the ranks through Fox. And then sort of through a lucky break, he was named USA and Syfy president. And then, I came to this company in the late 90s, and that's where I met Bonnie Hammer, who was just shortly thereafter named general manager and then president of the Syfy channel. And at that time, we were small enough that we were doing development for both USA Network and Syfy, and I was kind of the guy that would cross over from both channels, and everybody knew I had an interest in sci-fi, so they would throw me all the sci-fi projects. And one of my very first shows that I worked on was called The Invisible Man. And then there was a show on USA at the time called G versus Z that had some sci-fi, and we did some things like 4400 and Dead Zone and those shows, and that's kind of where I cut my teeth on science fiction shows. But it kind of ran the gamut. I worked on shows like Monk and Psych and the gamut of the USA shows, but always had a very special interest and ambition for sci-fi programming.
Well, I didn't realize that your history with the Syfy channel went back that far. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it went back to the very, very early days. So it's been a long road. I know a lot of people that kind of growing up with a lot of people here. It's very much home here. And
so how is science fiction seen in the TV industry? Did you encounter resistance to doing science fiction shows that you wanted to do?
Yeah, it's so funny how it's evolved. It would be every time you brought in a sci-fi pitch, in the late 90s or heard one and kind of got excited about it, the resistance you would face is people would say, it's too sci-fi. It's not relatable. It's not, and I think that's why you would see in those days so much watered down science fiction that was too sci-fi for an audience maybe that was not into science fiction, but not sci-fi enough for the people that are probably listening to this broadcast right now. But that's changed dramatically over the last few years. I think, shows like Battlestar Galactica, I think, was a bit ahead of its time in changing that perception. And now when you think of Game of Thrones and you think of Walking Dead and you think of the shows that we have on our air, the 12 Monkeys and hopefully the Expanse and Childhood's End, which are going to be on next week, you do not have to apologize anymore for being sci-fi. And I do not at all, not from Bonnie Hammer or Dave Howe or anybody here, feel a pressure to sort of water it down in any way, which is nice.
So do you think that if Game of Thrones or Walking Dead had come out 5 or 10 years before they actually did, that the audience just wasn't ready for it?
I think the audience was probably ready for it. I don't know that the industry was ready to execute it the way those shows have executed it.
Yeah. Okay, well, so tell us about how you ended up back at the Syfy channel.
Well, it was one of those things where we had a change of ownership. Comcast owns the corporation, and they recognized very early on, probably, behind the scenes, Bonnie Hammer and Dave Howe really persuading them to recognize this, that there's a lot of opportunity in this channel if we just had the investment. So it was clear to probably Bonnie and Dave that, there was going to be a big investment in the channel, and they were looking to really sort of beef it up, and they approached me about coming over kind of right before that investment started. So, I had a great job before, but again, I knew that I liked this stuff, and I saw the opportunity just as they did, and was very excited to join a couple years ago.
Right, and so your job title is Executive Vice President Original Content. So yep. What exactly does that involve?
That's, I oversee all of the original content that's generated out here in Los Angeles. So that's all of the scripted shows you see and all of the reality shows that come out of this coast. We do have a very active group that does acquired originals, which are acquisitions that we sort of guide. So there's lots of programming, but I oversee kind of the bulk of the original programming. It also includes alternative reality type shows too. So the Face-Offs, the 12 Monkeys, the shows that that are on our air, I have oversight over the executives who work day to day on those shows.
Right. And so you mentioned that Comcast is making a much bigger investment in the channel now. So what are you planning to do with that bigger investment?
Well, I think you're going to see the results, or by the time this podcast airs, you will have seen the results of, two big things we've done with that investment are the Expanse and Childhood's End. It was a priority to get back in the event miniseries space. This network's had a long history of event miniseries around the Christmas season, around the fourth quarter. And, now that we have the investment, we feel like we can really take on some big titles like Childhood's End. So that's one thing we've done with it. The Expanse is another. Past that, you're going to see Magicians early next year. So we've invested very much in that. We've invested kind of all across the network. When you look at the amount of original programming we've had, we've just tried to beef up the amount, but also be in a position where we could take strategic big bets on properties or shows that we're passionate about.
Right. And so you mentioned that Childhood's End was one of your favorite books growing up. Were you the one who's was it your idea to bring that to Syfy?
No, that was a lucky, I was very lucky in that it was in development here when I arrived. It did not have a script. It had producers, Mike DeLuca, Kiva Goldsman, as well as a really smart writer named Matthew Graham. But very early stages of development. So one of the first things I did was reread the book, and it was one of those books. I reread a few books in that first month, and I'm not going to mention the other ones because some of them, you remember from your childhood in a certain way, and then they don't hold up, when you get to be an adult. But what's so impressive about Childhood's End is it not only held up, I think I like it more and understand it more at this age than I did when I was a teenager. So that was very exciting for me. And then, with these big event miniseries, you really have to be a year and a half to 2 years ahead from when you greenlight because the effects get so complicated and the time to build effects properly is so long that you have to go quickly in order to make your dates. So in short order, we got that one going. And, like I said, now you're going to see the result of it.
I mean, how involved are you on a creative level with something like Childhood's End? Are you giving suggestions and things like that?
Yeah, that one, it took a village on that one because it was such a big undertaking. So the studio, the UCP studio, Jeff Wachtel, Don Olmsted, Brian Crow in particular over there, her team, and then my team, which was Paul Shapiro and Eli Kirshner. We were all in on that one. There was lots of conversations about how to adapt it. There was lots of back and forth between us and the producers. Very collaborative. We all just wanted to honor the book. And honor the book in a way that, we feel like will give him the recognition for being ahead of his time and really being the novelist who started it all. And that's what I'm most proud about is just I think that I think that people are going to really like it, and I think that it'll sort of later cause them to be interested in him and what he did, and really give him the recognition that he was just that so prescient, because all of the themes and all of the things he was writing about are so valid today.
Right, but it does seem like a challenging book to adapt, because there are a lot of characters. It takes place over a long span of time. It was set originally in 1953, so the world has changed a lot. Could you just talk about what were some of the big challenges with bringing it to television?
Well, the book is written sort of in episodes in a way. So there's main characters that dial, maybe not in episodes, in portions. And so there's main characters in the book that sort of die of natural causes, which don't really lead you to the most dramatic miniseries or movie telling of the book. So the one thing probably the biggest change we did is sort of thread characters throughout the entire 6 hour, where they weren't threaded throughout the entire book because the span of the book was a bit longer. So we condensed time, and in condensing time, you had to make other changes too. That was probably the most difficult one, was just try to figure out how to make that narrative work in a way that the Arthur C. Clarke book didn't really have to. There's also the challenge of, and this isn't a spoiler, but there's a significant portion of the book that deals with utopia. And the whole point of utopia is that there's not a lot of drama and not a lot of conflict. So we had to find ways during that section to bring some of the conflict from the end of the book up and do some inventing. But I just think Matthew and Akiva and Mike and that whole team did a great job of making sure the invention didn't cut against the spirit of what the book wanted to accomplish.
Right, and one thing that's really striking about Childhood's End, even though it was written in 1953, is that it still is provocative today. Was there any nervousness about presenting this story today?
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we're sitting there looking at the book, and we're like, well, there was a Cold War brewing between Russia and the United States. There were lots of fears about where the world would go, and would this nuclear race lead to our own extinction? And if you're going down a checklist, it was sort of like still relevant today, still very relevant today, still on that front page of all the newspapers today. So I don't think we had to change as many of those themes as we anticipated going in, and that made me happy. And I think that made all of us happy, because that's overall what we're trying to do with the science fiction we're putting on our air, is to not just do, big adventure action shows or things like that, but we really want people to walk away thinking about the episode or the miniseries or the pilot or whatever you watch on our channel in a way that makes you a little bit more informed about your world or reflect on where we are. I know those are lofty goals, but that's what great science fiction does. So that's our goal in our programming.
Right, and without going into any spoilers, one of the most striking things about this story is the appearance of the aliens. And nobody was leery about that at all, or?
Oh, we were very leery about that. I mean, that was probably, in the 18 months from pressing go to the shot miniseries, I want to say we probably spent a whole month just on that. On how to do it, whether we do CG or prosthetics or some combination of both. Can we, cast a person who could pull that off? It's a very important part of the book, and it's a very important part of our show, and we did not take that lightly. So leery, fearful, paranoid, all of those adjectives apply to our state of mind over that one issue.
Right, and so I think it's just so exciting that you guys are doing book adaptations like this, and it seems like you have a really heavy slate of book adaptations coming up. Could you talk about why you decided to move so heavily into adaptations of existing novels?
Well, there's sort of the pragmatic TV executive reason, which is it always helps to have a piece of intellectual property that's got a following, that people are passionate about. It helps. You're not starting from zero. People know it. You've got your fan base, your core fan base that's anxious to see the adaptation. So there's that. But there's also, there's also the other reason of, these novels do give you a good indication of the world you're creating, and creating a world is so important in sci-fi programming that it's nice to have essentially a Bible, which are the either one novel like Childhood's End or a series of novels like The Expanse or The Magicians, because you know where you're going and you can get ahead of it and plan for it in a way that you can't always do when just a script that's not based on anything comes in. But that's not to say we're going to be exclusively, not based on novel, because I would never close myself out or the network out to that great script that just sneaks its way through.
Right. I did want to talk about what some of these books were, though, because some of my favorite novels are on this list. But so the ones I wanted to mention in particular, you have another Arthur C. Clarke book as 3001, The Final Odyssey. You mentioned The Expanse and The Magicians. And then also coming up, I wanted to mention Dan Simmons' Hyperion, Frederick Pohl's Gateway, John Scalzi's The Ghost Brigades, Robert Charles Wilson's Spin, and Daryl Gregory's We Are All Completely Fine.
Yep.
That's just really exciting.
It's a big slate. When I hear you rattle them off like that, I'm like, yeah, we do. We actually have a big slate of books coming as well. And you've keyed on the ones we're most passionate about.
So how did those particular books come to your attention in the first place?
Well, all of them are probably represented by someone in the organization who is a big fan of it. Brave New World, and I hope I'm not outing her on this one, but Bonnie Hammer, our chairman, is a big fan of and always has been. 3001, an executive named Eli Kirshner, was pushing that one really hard, and I think we all got more interested in 3001 as we dove into Childhood's End and kind of fell back in love with Arthur C. Clarke. Hyperion, it feels like the entire city of Hollywood and Los Angeles comes up to me and tells me about that book everywhere I go. So I credit the entire industry. But I could go on and on. Every one of the books, there's an executive named Brian Brian Crow, who talked a lot about some of these, and everybody is pushing it on a certain level inside the company.
Right. And so Childhood's End, The Expanse, and The Magicians are either out now or will be out within a month or so. And then what else is coming up? Which of those is coming up soonest?
Well, the order is Childhood's End and The Expanse at the same time, and then Magicians will follow those two early in next year. There's also a show called Hunters, which Gail Ann Hurd of The Walking Dead is executive producing, along with a real superstar named Natalie Chaidez, which we went straight to series on. That'll be in that same section. We have 12 Monkeys season 2 as well, and then we're figuring out kind of the rest of the year right now as we speak.
Okay. I mean, one thing we were talking about in our last episode is that we think that Game of Thrones and The Expanse turned out so well because the authors were involved with the TV shows. Do you have plans to involve authors with some of these other TV shows?
Yeah, we've done it on every show. I mean, the authors who are alive are very involved in the show. I mean, Lev Grossman's been all over Magicians. The showrunners John McNamara and Sarah Gamble are talking to him all the time. The Expanse guys are on the show as writers. They've written scripts, and even in the first season, that's how I would very much prefer to do it always. When we can, that's how we're going to do it here, because we want to honor that core fan base that is passionate about the material. Otherwise, why are you doing it? So that and if you haven't gotten it already by our conversations and the stuff we've greenlit, we are really trying to focus on that core audience. So and I think the way to do that is to respect the stuff they really liked in the first place.
Right. So if Hyperion is so admired in LA, how come it's taken so long for it to come to television?
Well, any of your fans who have read the book know that it's not the most obvious adaptation. There's different points of view, there's different stories, and it needs development, and it needs you need to make a lot of choices in terms of the narrative and where you're going to start the story and who you're going to focus on. And there's just so many different great avenues you could pursue in that book. And those are always the most challenging. And it's kind of for the reasons I just talked about, because you do want to honor that fan base. But that at a certain point, you have to have a TV show that's intelligible, that people are going to understand. So, it's taken us a while on that one, but for all the right reasons.
Yeah, so I guess if people don't know, Hyperion is structured like the Canterbury Tales, where there are 7 or so characters who all tell their stories. Can you say anything about how you've decided to adapt it?
No, because we haven't made those decisions yet. We've heard takes, we've looked at some storylines, all that stuff, but we haven't hit on the one we like. So I would love to tell you that that's that we're very close and we've got it nailed, but we just haven't done it yet. But it is a priority, and it is something we want to figure out sooner rather than later.
Right. Okay, so then another thing I really wanted to ask you about is that the Syfy channel has something of a mixed reputation among hardcore science fiction fans. I'm sure you're aware of this. Do you want to say, kind of what's your take on that?
Well, hardcore science fiction fans are a very discerning, very passionate group. I was at Comic-Con one time, and I got into a long discussion / argument before I was with the channel, and there was a group of guys there that felt that science fiction only takes place in space. And it was kind of a fascinating argument. So anything Earth-based they didn't think was science fiction. So some of it is just what we love about our audience, their passion and their opinions. I think they're, to a certain level, you're never really going to be able to satisfy everybody, right? I think another part of it might have been, before we were properly funded because of the work Bonnie Hammer and Dave Howe have done with the channel, and just with our new owners, you weren't able to do hardcore science fiction like the stuff we have coming, particularly The Expanse, because you just simply didn't have the budget. And if you don't have the budget to go up into space and to to try to make that feel authentic, you might have to do some things that don't play to the core as much as sci-fi fans would like. So that we are sensitive to that, and we are trying to appeal to that and to that audience. That's why I'm so excited to be on your podcast today, because I think you speak to the audience that is going to be excited by this stuff, and we're trying to bring them back to our channel on a more consistent basis. But I'm happy that I can talk kind of directly to that audience on podcasts like this, and tell them that we get it, and that's what's motivating all these green lights and all these books that you mentioned, and a lot of our development.
Right. Well, yeah, because I mean, it was kind of striking to me that I just in preparation for this interview, I went back and looked through all our old episodes, and I don't think we ever really have talked about Sci-Fi Channel shows on this podcast since we launched it in 2010. And it's not because we're like boycotting the channel or something, but the shows have just not been what my friends and I were talking about. And certainly the things that you have coming up are things that we're going to be talking about. So I definitely see a change in our posture toward the Sci-Fi Channel going forward.
Yeah, I get it. You may not have been watching us, but we're all watching you, and our press people are fans of this show, and fans of all the outlets where we can reach that, and we're trying to be sensitive to that. So I'm really happy to hear you say that.
Okay, so I had a couple questions from listeners I wanted to ask you. So Megan Smith asks, are any female sci-fi writers going to be having their works adapted by the Sci-Fi Channel?
Yes, we are actively pursuing one book in particular that I'm not going to mention, because when I do, the option price will go up. But that is a priority of ours, and I would love there's so many great female authors out there today who don't get the credit they deserve, really. And I think if we can just get one of those shows on the air, or even in development, that people will really take note.
Right. I mean, so on our Facebook page, in this discussion, Carrie Vaughn posted that she'd like to see adaptations of Nancy Kress, Zena Henderson, Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler, Robin McKinley, Anne McCaffrey, and Lois McMaster-Bujold. And then Megan says she'd like to see Sherry S. Tepper. And I'll just throw in myself, Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie and The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Those were both guests on our show in the past year or two that I really thought those books were
terrific. That's great. Well, I can tell you that within that list you just rattled off is the book I'm chasing right now, that we're trying to get. So was it Megan who asked that question?
Yeah, Megan Smith.
Megan's going to be very happy if we figure this out. And here's the thing: even if we don't get it, it's a competitive situation. It will end up on another network. I hope it will end up on ours, but she'll see. I think within the next 3 or 4 months there'll be an announcement about the network that gets this particular novel, and it's included. The author's included in that list.
Okay, excellent. And then, so Anthony James says, I've heard that you're quote-unquote de-rebranding. Can you clarify what this means and whether you will be discarding the Sci-Fi SYFY name?
De-rebranding. I'm the programming guy, so I'm not the brand guy. And my general take on that sort of stuff, when you look at other channels around the dial, whether they be FX or AMC or something like that, I'm a believer, and probably any programming guy will say this, that the programming dictates the brand. And it sort of doesn't matter. I mean, who knew what AMC even stood for or what they were about until those shows came? So I don't really get into the branding marketing part of the gig. There's other people here who do that. I'm just trying to make the shows speak loudly for who we are and what we want to be.
Right. Yeah. Because I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but I mean, certainly among my friends, there was a perception that the channel was attempting to distance themselves from science fiction fans. And I don't know how big a deal the name change is, but there were things that would happen, like on Battlestar Galactica, different actors would say like, "Oh no, this show isn't science fiction because it's good," and I mean that kind of thing like really rubs fans the wrong way. And I just wonder if there's because what I would love to see for once in my life is an actor on a show like Battlestar Galactica would say, "No, this show is science fiction and it's one of the best shows you've ever seen, and this is an example of how good science fiction can be when it's done right, and watch it and see for yourself."
Yeah, all of that stuff's been said by other people, and all that. All I can really speak to is the last 2 years. since I've been here, and in the last 2 years, it certainly has not been that. I've never been told to apologize for it being sci-fi or say this isn't really sci-fi or any of that stuff. In fact, I've been told just the opposite. And again, I think I think the programs we put on the air will reflect that, and hopefully convert all of those people.
All right, cool. So John Joseph Adams asks, I'd like to, you probably can't answer this, but he says, I'd like to know how much those Childhood's End and Magician's promo packages cost. The Childhood's End one has a freaking video screen in it that autoplays the full-length trailer when you open it up. And the Magician's one was full of Breakbill swag, scarf, notebook, hat, etc. I know you can't say how much they cost, but do you want to just talk about how elaborate those?
The truth is, I don't even know how much they cost, but I like them just as much as he does. We do like to do that stuff. This network's had a long history of that, but it's really in the last couple of years, really in the last even few months, those kits have astounded me. And we have a new press team. We have some people who have ascended up the marketing ranks, who have just taken it to a level that's, I almost want to sell them to people because they're so spectacular. But no, I don't know. I can't really speak to the cost.
Yeah. No, I just got on this list for these things, so I just started getting them. So I don't know what kind of things the channel has been sending out in prior years, but this stuff is really impressive. The scarf I got, it's a Breakbill scarf, which is the school. It's like the Hogwarts school in The Magicians. I was like, this is a pretty nice scarf. I've actually been wearing it around, and my girlfriend says, I think you're the only person who would actually wear this stuff. Wear the stuff they send you.
You know what? Keep wearing it. Keep wearing it until that show premieres. One of the fun moments I had is I happened to be in New York when we showed that to Lev Grossman. And he flipped out for it. He just completely flipped out for it because he is a flag-waving fantasy fan, and he just felt that captured exactly what he tried to do with the show. And it was a really nice moment to see an author get to experience what you did.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and so then Rory Carroll says, are TV shows like theirs still working on the quote-unquote appointment-to-view model, or are modern shows gearing more toward the binge-viewing trend we've seen with box sets and video on demand?
Well, look, I mean, the answer is both. We're all big TV fans here. I am. I have a almost 3-year-old son. A lot of the viewing I do at home because of that little 3-year-old can't be live. So we're aware of that. There's a big percentage of our audience that still watches these things live, but we know it's not just live or DVR. It's VOD. It's prelinear. It's online in various sources. We really are. We've loosened the rules in terms of how we get these shows out there because we want to get them out across every digital platform we can. Anywhere you would consume, television or entertainment, we want to put it there. And ultimately, of course we'd love people to be watching them live and stuff like that, but it's a changing marketplace, and we're just trying to be ahead of those changes. So we recognize that. I mean, a gigantic portion of the 12 Monkeys audience came to the show after its live airing on all these various platforms. So the measurement's getting better. It's not where it needs to be. The way to monetize that is not where it needs to be yet, but we certainly recognize that.
Well, right. For example, you put out the pilot for The Expanse just as a downloadable file, and I think you're doing the same thing with Magicians.
Yeah. And that's meant to, we know where a lot of what's so great about the sci-fi audience is, through these message boards, through the IO9s of the world, AV clubs, your show, we know where a lot of these people live. We know where they are. We know what's important to them, and this is the first time in my career, with The Expanse that I've ever been a part of one of these what's called pre-linear releases, where we release it online before its air date. So I've been trolling these message boards in a way that I never have before because I find it so fascinating. You get kind of the direct feedback, and I'm very happy with what people are saying because I've been on those message boards on shows before that they're not into, and that's not fun. So it's really fascinating to see it to have kind of that direct relationship with the viewers in that way.
Right, and I would really recommend people check out these pilots because I think that I think a lot of people have an idea of the production values of a Sci-Fi Channel show, and these new shows completely blow that out of the water. I mean, Childhood's End, The Expanse in particular, I mean, they look as good as anything on television.
Or at the movie theater, honestly, there's certain sequences in The Expanse, and I will tell your viewers throughout the duration of The Expanse and Childhood's End, I very much agree with you. I think the effects are great, but there's one episode in particular, episode 4 of The Expanse, that we did some real heavy-duty effects. And it was one of those episodes that I read and I loved, and I was just sort of looking at it, and I'm like, are we really going to be able to pull this off? And I was very happy with it. So that's I'm glad you feel that way, because that's the goal. That's the goal with this investment, is to really show people that we're serious and when. Obviously, you can't do that every time. You can't spend that kind of money on every show. But when we feel appropriate, we can go there in our company. And I have to keep saying it, because I think if they hear it, they'll keep investing. But Comcast, Bonnie Hammer, Dave Howe, are all very, very, the wallet will open for the right show. And that's what makes it so exciting to have this job right now.
So in all this time that you've spent kind of trolling message boards, what do any interactions that you've had stick out in your mind?
Yeah, I did go in, I did get into a sort of conversation with like 8 people. Obviously, they had no idea who I was, and it was sort of around the space operas, and it was very informative for me, because they were very specific on kind of what they wanted and what shows they loved, and it was a lot about Battlestar Galactica. And it was just a great forum for me to just sort of ask questions without them knowing who I was, that we could then take back to, our development.
I mean, what were some of the kind of things that they wanted to see in a space opera show?
Well, there was one woman in particular, and it was really interesting because the conversation was about the amount of combat and the amount of war you'd want in a space opera, and does that come with the expectation? Is just as you're exploring, as you're out there in space, is part of the quid pro quo of a space opera. Okay, I want to see some heavy duty battle, and this one woman in particular didn't like that piece of it. She was much more into the sort of anthropology of exploration and learning about new places and new cultures and culture clashes and stuff like that. Whereas, 3 other people vehemently disagreed that they wanted this. So it was just sort of an interesting point of view on it. And that's what's so great about these message boards and so great about this job, is you can get really granular and you can really geek out. But still, it still sort of informs, how you approach something like The Expanse or some of our other shows.
Right. There's a thing that sticks in my mind where toward the end of the Next Generation feature films, Jonathan Frakes was quoted as saying, I think that Star Trek fans really want these to be action movies. And I think that was, I saw a video online totally disagreeing with that. And I think that expresses the views of myself and a lot of fans, that we don't particularly want Star Trek or shows like it to be action movies. We want them to be smart, just basically the smarter the better.
Yeah. I 1,000% agree with you. I when you're doing action, I think you want to do it right, and I think you want to be inventive. And there's certainly a lot of action in The Expanse, and there's some action sequences in Childhood's End. But Childhood's End in particular, and the Arthur C. Clarke novel in particular, didn't go for the easy sort of set piece action sequence. I hate to say this, but some of Childhood's End's, some of the movies and things like that ripped it off went that route in a way that I thought made those things less interesting than they could have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one thing I want to ask you about is, from your perspective as a TV executive, I mean, these shows get canceled, like Farscape and Firefly in particular, that everybody I know loves. And I recognize that my friends are not representative of the general public, but I have trouble
sure
understanding. They are. I just have trouble understanding how shows that so many people that I know love so much end up getting canceled. Can you explain that to me?
Just in a general sense?
Yeah, just in a general sense, yeah. For space opera shows in particular, I guess.
Well, we get a lot of grief for this that I think is kind of undeserved because we do more original programming than people realize. So when you're doing more original programming, the odds are you're not going to be able to continue to renew all of them. I will tell you that the worst day you can have in this job is the day you do that. Not just when you have to deliver the awful news to the producers and writers that you've spent, years with, and really feel like a very personal connection with, but then the aftermath of the fan base who inevitably finds your email or something. Or lights up those message boards. It's a real horrible thing, and it's something we try to avoid as much as we can. But just the practical parts of the job and the shows that kind of run their course and things like that take over, and you just have to do it. But I think the sci-fi fans, because they're probably more passionate than the average fan, take it a little harder. So I get it, and I'm one of those people. I'm certainly one of those people. There's nothing I hate more than when a show I've invested this time in to leaves after a year or two. And particularly when they leave me with some unanswered questions, because it's just like, well, that's terrible, because I wanted to find that out, or I wanted to live with these people longer. So with every show, every cancellation, I think that people just feel like we're in here just sort of knee-jerking, let's cancel this, pick up that. A lot of behind-the-scenes thought, a lot of ideas go into it, a lot of ways to sort of honor the audience that have been there. I know it doesn't feel like that all the time, but that is the truth.
Well, I mean, I can definitely understand if a show is not getting great ratings that you cancel it, that this is a business. But it seems like because the science fiction fans are so passionate, it seems like a lot of shows that it seems like they have a potential more so than the numbers by themselves would suggest. I mean, if you look at the Star Trek, the original series, there were probably tons and tons of shows at that time that had much better ratings than that are completely forgotten today, whereas Star Trek has grown into this multi-billion-dollar franchise.
Yeah, and look, that's part of the gig. That's part of my job and our jobs as a network. I mean, I am proud to say that, 12 Monkeys, and just to use that as an example, did well for us, but it didn't. The ratings didn't make it such an obvious no-brainer to go to the second season of that show. But by the time we saw, 3 or 4 episodes, we recognized the quality, and we said, you know what, that's not how we're going to make this decision. We just think that we think it's a good show that's getting better and better every week. And season 2 is, I've seen most of, is better than season 1 even. And that we when we can, we do that. And I don't think people notice it until they cancel it sometimes. But we have, and why I like working here and why I like working for this corporation and this channel in particular is we are willing to make those bets on quality.
Yeah, I mean, because it would seem like kind of a no-brainer to me to bring back shows like Farscape and Firefly that have such passionate fan bases. But maybe I don't know all the factors. But why do networks take risks on completely new shows that no one's ever heard of when there are these really popular shows that have been canceled sitting around that could be brought back?
Look, some of it could just be sort of the ego of these jobs. Maybe that's like that was their show. I want to do something that's wholly my own, and if it lived somewhere else, it really is not. There is a sitting with a writer from the very beginning kind of connection you have, working on a pilot, working through a show that's hard to get when you take a show that's lives for 3 seasons or 2 seasons on another network. I mean, I think you're seeing it happening. I think some cable channels have done it. I think that some of the Netflixes and the Amazons of the world have picked up shows that lived somewhere else. So I do think the world's changing that way. And I think it may continue to because, in a show like 12 Monkeys, just to use an example, while it didn't, get the linear rating out of the gate that we wanted, had we canceled it, right, we'd be kicking ourselves right now because the VOD numbers were so spectacular. And so we saw the big audience came to it that way. I think you're probably going to see more and more of that, and you may see a show canceled prematurely and then a network reconsider because of the viewers finding it at another platform.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned that growing up you would watch Twilight Zone with your dad, and I really love those sorts of anthology shows. I don't know if you've seen Black Mirror, but that was one of the things we loved the most on this show in the
I
past.
not only saw Black Mirror, but we chased that show about as hard as you possibly could. I thought it was phenomenal. I got to know the creators really well. I adore that show. It's the closest thing that I've seen to the Twilight Zone. So, that was one of those things that kind of the one that got away. But I very much agree with you. I think that's an amazing show.
But so you think that you'll definitely try to grab something, an anthology show like that, if another one comes along?
Well, I think the bar is so high in anthology that you got to be choosy. Now, there's a show called Channel Zero Candle Cove that we have greenlit that's going to be sort of anthology by installments, so 6-episode installments each year, which is sort of like an anthology but extended. It's not going to be the weekly anthology like a Twilight Zone or a Black Mirror or something like that. But I love that. I mean, Twilight Zone's my favorite science fiction show of all time. And I've gotten into deep, intense arguments with Star Trek fans over this. But for me, it's Twilight Zone. It's just for better or for worse. That's my thing. So I would love that, but I think you also have to acknowledge that if you're going to do that, you really need the Rod Serling. You really need the person behind the camera who can create those kinds of stories each week, because bad anthology is really bad.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, like, I think one of the reasons that Twilight Zone and Star Trek, those shows were so good is because they brought in science fiction authors. I mean, you're doing this now, but they brought in science fiction novelists to write for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it just seems natural to me, because John and I, who started the show, are so involved with short stories. It just seems natural to me to just take all the best short stories of the past 10 years and turn it into an anthology show.
Yeah, there are practical reasons why it's hard to. Sometimes those short stories have different owners, and so there's ownership complications there. Then it's sort of, sometimes they're so diverse that it becomes impractical to be able to produce them on anything that resembles a timely television schedule. But those walls are starting to break down, and I think that's an interesting idea. It's also kind of about finding the stories that thread together sort of thematically. And that's what was so brilliant about the Twilight Zone. Even though they were very diverse kinds of stories, they all felt like they were of the same mind, certainly because of Rod Serling, but also of the same sort of themes, the same sort of ideas, because you do need to at least have some sort of thread. I mean, you mentioned Black Mirror, and that's sort of the perils of technology and the perils of that's the title, Black Mirror. And they've done a brilliant job at that. And until you find that, I think it's a tough thing to just jump into.
Yeah. And then, when the Syfy channel first launched, when I was in middle school, the sort of what I imagined in my head, what I dreamed it would be, is they would have talk shows where I'd interview my favorite authors.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, part of the reason I do this podcast, obviously, is because I'm interested in that sort of thing, but there's never really been stuff like that. I mean, there's Prisoners of Gravity in Canada went for a while, and sort of Sword and Laser was on YouTube for a while.
Yeah.
Is there any, could you talk about what are the factors involved in launching a science fiction talk show like that on a TV network?
Well, I think it's a show like that would be challenging today, because I cobble together a lot of the interviews with my favorite film directors or whatever just, online. And I think it's so much easier online to do stuff like that for the geeks like you and I who can't get enough of that, than to really in my opinion, launch a television show that's going to generate enough interest week to week among enough of an audience to keep it going. Some of these things, magazine shows are hard for the same reason. When you can just click your way out to your favorite author and find Arthur C. Clarke essays or old Arthur C. Clarke interviews or whatever, and just sort of do that online, it's hard for me to imagine a show that would feel urgent enough or relevant enough to get an audience there on enough of a week-to-week basis to do it. But I could be wrong. Somebody may prove me wrong. I mean, I watch Charlie Rose every night. My wife's like, what are you, an 80-year-old man? But so I am very into that, and I have a lot of patience for that. And, if I don't watch it that night, I'll watch it the next morning. So I hear what you're saying. I just don't know if given the choices you have with original programming, you'd want to spend it there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we're almost out of time. So I guess just the last thing I wanted to ask you is just, it's so frustrating for science fiction fans to, as you mentioned, to love these shows so much and just have them go off the air. And then what I've heard is that by the time you hear that the show's going off the air, it's really too late for you as a fan to do anything. That decision has already been made. But so obviously with all these shows based on some of my favorite books coming out, I just want to know what can I and what can our listeners do now or, in the days to come to make sure that these shows don't disappear on us?
Watch them, tell their friends to watch them, tweet about them, Facebook post about them, fill up the comment boards about stuff you like, because like I said, we're watching that stuff, all of it. Buzz in the day and age of this many great programs becomes a reason to pick up a show. In a way that it never, this year in particular, in a way that it's never been before in this business. So don't underestimate your ability as a viewer and as a passionate fan to really get out there. And you have the forums now. There's syfy.com, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's all that stuff. You can simply tell all of your friends to watch it, and somehow, some way, you'll probably end up getting to a Nielsen box owner. But I really do mean, I think the power is in the hand of the consumer in a way it hasn't been. But the earlier the better. Really, the earlier the better. I think there is some truth to, if those fans would have come out and mobilized the way they do after a cancellation during a run in some form, it would have been a lot easier. And a guy like me who has bosses and my bosses have bosses, we need to build a case about why to pick up a show. And if we have these things we can point to, it makes our job a lot easier.
Right. I guess, do you want to just remind people what are the things, again, that they should watch now or in the next month or so?
Well, the first three biggies are Childhood's End miniseries, the Expanse series, followed by Magicians. Then there is going to be a couple. Hunters will come after that. 12 Monkeys Season 2 short after that. I mean, I could go on and on. I could name our whole schedule, but that feels sort of rude. I will say, because I haven't talked about it, and I've got a whole crew of people who work hard on these things, we have an alternative show that I kind of think your audience is going to dig called The Internet Ruined My Life.
Oh, yeah. I looked at that, yeah.
It's really fun and provocative and interesting and deals with this digital world and how one wrong tweet, one wrong Facebook post can really impact your life. And I just think it's great. That one's also going to be coming. But that one, along with these big scripted shows, are the ones I'd love your viewers to prioritize.
Yeah. No, I interviewed John Ronson earlier this year, and he had a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and that was kind of looking like the TV version of that book. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a really fun show, and I think it fits our network because of all of the stuff we do around technology and how tech savvy we know our audience base is. I think they're going to dig it, and I think your podcast fans should dig it. But thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Yeah. All right. Great. So we've been speaking with Bill Mcgoldrick. So thank you so much for joining us.
You got it.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Bill Mcgoldrick for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Daniel in Idaho, who writes, "Time well spent. Charlie Rose, look out. This guy knows how to do an interview." So big thanks again to Daniel in Idaho for that great review. Big thanks as well to Alex Cornish and Leon Fournier, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I'd like to give a special thank you to Kathleen Arbuckle, who just became the latest PayPal patron to be making monthly contributions to the show. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.